In the near future, humanity ended up destroying its own planet. People lived in pursuit of pleasure, while the ice caps warmed and the permafrost melted, releasing viruses and bacteria that had lain dormant for millions of years, patiently waiting for the right moment to wipe out all forms of life. Authorities spent their last resources on building rockets intended to send the survivors into space, but there was no clear plan for their destination. It's likely they died from cosmic radiation or killed each other fighting over the last supplies. Those who survived took shelter in the mountains, far from the infected areas, but no one knew how many they were. Ev is among the survivors. She has a small military robot named Arthur, damaged during the climate wars. He creaks, makes strange noises, and looks like a beggar, but still fulfills his function of protecting her, though it's unclear exactly who she needs protection from. On this particular day, Ev is preparing to head into the city, even though the journey is dangerous. Arthur warns her not to drink the local water under any circumstances. Ev, in turn, reminds him to keep a better watch over the base. When the robot seems confused by her command, she tells him it was just a joke, something the robot doesn't understand, even though he knows in theory that humor exists. Ev drives along the dusty road, littered with debris left behind by civilization. When she reaches a supermarket, she finds what she needs, and for some reason picks up a packet of lavender seeds, even though she knows they likely won't sprout. Before leaving, she writes a note on the wall with the coordinates of where she lives, hoping someone might read it. Upon her return, Arthur greets her, immediately demanding the password. Ev says the word, and in response to his question, she tells him she went shopping at the mall, had coffee with a friend, and later went to a concert with her friends. Since Arthur doesn't understand sarcasm, Ev promises to make adjustments to the robot's visual system. She unloads the car, having to repeat the password every time, which irritates her. In a moment of mischief, she deliberately says the wrong word, causing the robot to threaten her with a weapon. Ev silences her jokes after the incident. Later, after the trip, Ev takes a cleansing shower and tries once again to contact someone over the radio, but the frequencies remain silent. That night, she waters the plants in the greenhouse, jots down the few fragments of news she has, repairs broken objects, and throws a ball against the wall to distract herself, while Arthur patrols the small perimeter of the station, watching for potential unknown invaders. The next morning, Ev begins installing a solar panel and suggests to Arthur that they play a guessing game. She proposes the first one, which he solves easily. Then, it's Arthur's turn to propose one. The game continues until Ev presents a riddle about 3 robots. Arthur can't solve it because only a human can understand it, and he asks for the solution. Ev simply laughs, satisfied that she has finally outsmarted the robot. In a playful tone, Ev proposes that Arthur marry her. He responds with the dictionary definition of marriage and states that such a union between them is impossible. With bitterness, Ev says she has no one but the robot. Her father built the base, then left for his unit after the war, bringing Arthur with him after finding him in a warehouse. After that, her father left again, promising to return in a few days, while the robot stayed behind to protect her. But a long time passed, and he never came back, so the only one she could marry was the robot. Without understanding the joke, Arthur observes that a flaw in a husband or wife can be a serious problem and suggests that Ev could always replace him with a newer model. People do that all the time. Still, replacements don't always work, and maybe they're the last 2 beings left on Earth. Arthur cannot confirm or deny that, as his database only goes up until the end of the year 2040. At that time, the Earth's population was 9.5 billion. He states that he usually leaves his coordinates in the restricted zone, but doesn't understand the reason, since no one would still be alive to read them, and there is no one around. He asks her to remind him of the 3 main laws of robotics, and Arthur promptly lists them. A robot may not harm a human. A robot must obey all orders. A robot must ensure its own existence, as long as it doesn't conflict with the first 2. Ev reminds him that his robot should also be looking for new energy sources. Arthur highlights that he is a patrol robot, not a collection robot, and his function is to prevent the entry of invaders. To him, an invader is anyone who doesn't know the password. Ev reminds him that during the climate war, he served at the border and didn't let anyone pass just because people didn't know the password. At that time, India was facing a severe water shortage, and temperatures had risen so much that people and animals were literally cooking alive. The only chance was to flee to a place with a possibility of survival. Meanwhile, the North had surrounded its border with thousands of robots, which led to the largest massacre in human history. This resulted in the genocide of people fighting for their lives. Since Arthur's memory was wiped, if Ev knew the password, she would have reinstalled his system a long time ago, assigning him new functions instead of this meaningless patrol. After all, what she needs is a cleaning robot that actually has some utility. For now, Ev finishes installing the solar panels so they can hang up some lights. Christmas is approaching, and the girl thinks about what to give Arthur as a gift, but he reminds her that robots don't receive gifts. Ev laments that he is just a piece of metal with no emotions, and asks him to at least pretend to have consciousness. With the sunset approaching, Arthur finds Ev and admits that he would like to receive a new eye as a gift. Ev promises to take care of that once she finishes decorating the tree. Arthur recalls the riddle about the 3 robots and asks her to reveal the correct answer, but Ev avoids it. That night, she does her routine tasks and then grabs a box of Christmas decorations. The next morning, she informs Arthur that she's going out to find an artificial Christmas tree, since there are no longer any living trees. As usual, Arthur warns her about the dangers of such a trip, advising her to wear the suit, bring a spare oxygen cylinder, and under no circumstances drink the water. Ev starts loading her equipment, but when she returns home, the robot blocks the entrance, demanding the password. She automatically responds with the old one, but Arthur doesn't allow her inside because a new password went into effect that day, and it is automatically updated every 3 months. Ev remembers that the new password is written in a book on top of the refrigerator, but she can't reach it without being inside the base, and Arthur won't let her in. She tries all the words that come to mind, but doesn't know how to guess one single word out of millions. She tries to negotiate with the robot, reminding him that she is the only person there. Probably the last human on Earth, having survived all the others, fighting every day to stay alive. Furious, she asks the robot if she's really gonna die out there, outside the base, just because she doesn't know the password. Ev tries to simply pass by Arthur, but he raises his weapon. She realizes he isn't bluffing. Avoiding the weapon, she tries to think of what to do next, because there must be a way out. The robot's patrol area is limited, so while he can't see her, Ev needs to come up with a solution. After some time, Ev approaches Arthur again, acting as if nothing had happened. She says she needs an axe to cut down a tree and will tell him the password once she's inside the base. Unexpectedly, Arthur reminds her that there are no more living trees, so it doesn't make sense for her to want an axe. Once again, Ev tries to convince the robot to let her in. After all, he knows her perfectly. He confirms that he recognizes her, but says he cannot allow her entry without the password. Ev suggests that he let her in just for a moment to look at the password, promising that everything will be fine. If she says the wrong word, he can kill her. The robot responds that he can't do that because his function is to protect humans. In this case, the only person he could destroy is an intruder, and that means anyone who doesn't know the password. Realizing there's no way out, Ev spends the night outside, throwing stones at the robot from time to time, but he never abandons his post. Dawn arrives and Ev turns her clothes inside out, covers her face, and approaches Arthur, trying to pass herself off as a refugee seeking asylum. She remembers that according to Article 14 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, everyone has the right to seek asylum from persecution in other countries. Arthur agrees to discuss the matter with Ev once she returns from behind the generator. Ev leaves and returns, looking like herself. Arthur reports that a stranger appeared the previous day and a refugee has just arrived now. Ev orders that next time the refugee appears, he should offer her water. She leaves the robot's line of sight, changes clothes, and returns as the refugee, asking for water. But Arthur begins to interrogate her, trying to determine if she's a political or climate refugee. Ev claims she's a political refugee, as climate refugees have no rights. However, the robot demands proof that she's been persecuted in her home country. She reminds him of the Geneva Convention, which states that no evidence is required, but the robot insists that a refugee must explain why it became dangerous to stay in their country and asks her to provide justification. Ev explains that she fled from the war, the aggressor burned her house, killed her relatives, and even shot at her. The robot considers her justification sufficient, but demands documents. Losing her patience, Ev questions what kind of documents a war refugee could possibly have. Even so, the robot recites the steps of the protocol, filling out an application with the border service, among other requirements. Desperate, Ev simply asks for some water. Arthur promises to do that only after he gives water to Ev, who is already dehydrated and at risk of death. Ev spends the second night by the generator. In the morning, she tries once more to pass by the robot, but seeing him on guard again, she gives up. He asks if she's sure there are no more humans left on Earth, since a stranger and a refugee have appeared. But Ev is too exhausted to argue with the machine. Arthur mentions a nearby station that has been operating for a century, suggesting that someone must be maintaining it. Ev assumes that only robots without consciousness are in charge there. Arthur refuses to bring or carry anything outside the base. Ev looks at the distant station, convinced that it's just another mindless machine, stuck with its finger on the shutdown button, blocked by a simple request for confirmation that it isn't a robot. She searches the vehicle for water, but finds nothing. Instead, she discovers lavender seeds. She plants them near the car and begs for them to sprout. Then she proposes a deal to the robot. She promises to tell the answer to the riddle of the 3 robots if he lets her enter the base. But Arthur doesn't give in to the proposal. She begs for a little water in exchange for the answer, but the robot remains silent. Faced with this, Ev decides to head to the station despite having very little oxygen left in her suit. She walks to the facility, climbing up a slope and then descending with the help of a rope through a massive tube. The place is completely desolate. Although the control panel still shows some blinking lights, Ev searches the surroundings but finds nothing useful. Suddenly, she comes across a locked door with some bottles on the other side, just as the alarm in her suit indicates that the oxygen is running out. With no options left, she removes the suit and breaks the small window in the door with an axe. She forces her way in, but discovers that all the bottles are empty. No longer concerned about her own safety, she continues exploring the base. She even hears a faucet dripping, but ignores the sound, remembering Arthur's warning, not finding anything that could help her. She returns to the site, speeds up the vehicle, and drives it into Arthur. The explosion is intense, but the combat robot remains intact. In the morning, Arthur finds Ev weakened and reports that a stranger tried to invade the camp during the night. Now, this stranger and the refugee are hiding behind the generator. Ev begs for water, but Arthur cannot abandon his post. Hallucinating, Ev sees her father telling her to drink. When she regains consciousness, Arthur demands the password, or she will die. Later, Ev tries to collect raindrops from the roof, but she soon vomits them up. In a sarcastic tone, she comments that if Arthur were her husband, he would help her. The robot merely observes that she will die soon without proper hydration. That night, Ev imagines herself in a city, hearing children's voices around her. In the morning, Arthur asks for the answer to the riddle of the 3 robots, and she crawls toward him. She manages to stand for a moment, but then collapses again. She finds herself in that city, trying to figure out how to defeat the machine. Arthur then reveals that after Ev's death, emergency mode will be activated, and the password will be reset. He will be left alone, although he points out that the refugee and the stranger are still around, meaning humanity still survives. Ev's last request is for Arthur to water her seeds. She dies, and the robot accepts one final password, lavender.